Hi there, I'm Maria Leone from Bodyline, and I want to talk to you today about a subject that is dear to my heart, which is how to choose a Pilates teacher training program. So I've been teaching teachers, not clients, but just teachers for 25 years, and I've been doing that through two different educators. And I also did considerable research about all the different training programs that are out there in the world before I chose to eventually move to Balance Body, which is the company that I currently work for. In the olden days, there was no such thing as teacher training. So how did we get trained? By going into a studio, creating a relationship with a teacher, and basically shadowing them and learning as we went. There was no formal training when I originally began teaching, but then I of course went on to get some formalized training because in our industry it has gotten more and more important to have the proper credentials when teaching. This comes into just being hired for a job, but it also becomes very, very important when you start to consider liability and you begin to consider injuries and accidents that can happen in a Pilates studio. I work a lot as a Pilates expert witness in injury cases, and one of the first things that we always look at is who is the teacher, were they credentialed, and who were they credentialed by. So here's some things to consider. There are lots of great, larger educators. And there are many people doing it just out of their mom and pop shop. Like me, this is my studio Bodyline, and I could have my own teacher training program. You could go through teacher training with Maria Leone. I wouldn't encourage you to do that, and here's why not. The price point really for going into a small boutique studio and getting trained by them versus a larger brand company like Balance Body or Bassi or Stott, they're more or less at the same price point. And what I've found from my experience of talking to teachers, tons of teachers from all over the country really, and having lots of teachers come to me after having started a program somewhere else and got very disappointed or disillusioned by what the education really was, come to me and start all over through either one of the other companies that I worked for. So very often with a smaller business, a smaller teacher training program, that business is really only interested in training you to work at their studio. So in other words, it's really hard to find good help. And it takes a long time to become a good teacher. So a lot of small businesses just decide, I'm just gonna start my own program. And literally, anybody can start a Pilates certification program. That's just the way the industry is. So with those smaller businesses, I don't really think that they are trying to educate you to know the vast body of work that is out there in the Pilates world. I think they're just trying to teach you the exercises they teach in their business so they can get you working for them. The other thing with all teacher training programs that I want you to really take a look at, and the good teacher training programs will have hours in person where you're doing the education and going through a module, but there are going to be other components as well. There's going to be observation required, there's going to be, of course, practice required, but also practice teaching required, and you want that. I know it's like kind of a bummer that you have to do all these hours. And actually, when people call to get information from us about teacher training, this is what they want to know. How long does it take and what does it cost? And you should not have those as your two primary things that you're looking at when choosing an educator, because a lot of things can go wrong. So a lot of just be on the lookout for the studio, wherever you're doing your education, that they start to use you to service their full paying clientele when you haven't even finished a program yet, okay? So I'm gonna say that again, because some programs will say, oh, come to us and you can actually earn money while you're going through your teacher training program. And what they often do is they're offering private training, And the apprentice person, the person that isn't even a full teacher yet, is getting paid minimum wage for that hour, which might sound attractive, but the clients aren't aware that they're working with somebody that isn't fully trained yet, and yet the studios charge the same price. So I really encourage you to go to a bigger brand name. Also, the bigger brands tend to have really nice materials. So I'm just going to show you very quickly the manual, the Balanced Body manual, right? And there's really is, you know, this takes capital to be able to create really nice materials, things that you have in your hand, and then also online information to go along with that manual. The other reason to go with a bigger brand, and again, I've been doing this a very long time, and honestly, I could have my own teacher training program. Well, number one, I don't want to take the time to create all of this. But also, at the end of the day, when students come to me and they get trained by me, I want them to be able to go anywhere in the world and get a job, right? So the company that I work for has national and international recognition. So you might have somebody who's a great teacher, but when you leave that community, even if you came to me and I gave you great training, when you go to Italy, they're going to be like, who is Maria Leone? Like, what kind of teacher training program is that? Very different than saying, oh, I come from Stott, I come from Balanced Body, I come from Peak. These are big brands that are respected nationally and internationally. So I really encourage you to go with a big brand educator. So that's number one, big brand or small boutique. The second thing is for you to start to understand the different kind of styles that are out there in the Pilates industry. And I know this can get super confusing. It's even confusing to me, particularly now in this day and age, in the age of Instagram, where Pilates just seems to be growing exponentially. To make it very basic, to me, there are three different kinds of Pilates. There is what I would call contemporary Pilates. Contemporary Pilates, I would say, is what I teach, and the educator that I work for, Balanced Body, would consider themselves contemporary. So what does that mean? That means that we do a lot of the exercises that Joe did. 100, roll up, roll over, leg circle, you know, footwork on the reformer, pulling straps, swan, knee stretch series, elephant. These are all sort of, this is terminology that is the same throughout the Pilates community. So we teach the traditional exercises that Joe did, but we apply science and updates that we're getting from the physical therapy world to our work. So for example, we teach a lot less flexion-based exercises than Joe did. And if you go back and you look at historical footage of Joe and watch him move, the man was a genius and a brilliant inventor, but by today's standards, we'd be like, yeah, I don't know if he should always be doing everything in a round position all the time, because that's not really what the regular population needs anymore. So there are contemporary people, contemporary educators that embrace Joe's principles. Joe has 9 principles. It's sort of like the aesthetic of how we teach and why we teach. So contemporary teachers teach by Joe's principles and a lot of his original exercises, but we also add to it. And we add, you know, different props and different things to the machine. And we encourage creativity, and even the equipment, it also reflects that creativity. Okay, so that's contemporary. Then there is classical Pilates. And classical Pilates believes really strongly to adhering to the traditions of what Joe laid down. His principles, his exercises, his transitions. It's very, very codified technique. The levels are very codified. The sequencing is very codified. It's very exact. It's very precise. And there used to only be one equipment manufacturer, period, that you could do classical Pilates on. Now the classical Pilates world and the equipment world has gotten a little bit crowded, and I feel like there's a lot of infighting over there with the different brands, and that's another whole video. But basically, they stick to exactly what Joe did, and they're very upfront about that, because that's what one of the main tenets of their teaching. So contemporary, classical. Third category, I don't really exactly have a label for it, but I'm going to call it fitness-based Pilates, which can mean a couple of different things. So there is newer equipment that looks similar to a reformer, spring-based, and yet the kind of movement that's actually being done on those reformers and that equipment is actually more just straight fitness. Sometimes cross-training being done on that equipment, sometimes endurance training, sometimes high interval training. One of the big differences here is that they are primarily facilities that are based only on group fitness, and they aren't really dealing with people with injuries, trying to do any kind of rehab at all, and nor is there any talk about the history of Joseph Pilates, and nor is there any talk of Joe's principles, the breath, centering, control, rhythm and flow. So those things are kind of by the wayside. I would say that they are, again, and I'm very opinionated, I'm going to say that they are not true mind-body disciplines, right? It's more fitness. They're not trying to integrate the mind and the body and the breath and do this holistic, functional strengthening. They're trying to work you out. And that might be what you want to do. You might just want to work people out. You might just want to get them to sweat. You might just want to do strength training. And that's fine. It's just a little bit different. So it's important to know what kind of style you're going for. Your teacher is, whoever taught you Pilates, might be a good resource, but I would spend the time and look broader than just your teacher who you have a personal relationship with. Okay, so there are also different levels of certification or teacher training. So there's the mat level, there is mat and reformer level, and there's also something called comprehensive training. And then different schools have different terminology for this. When I first started doing teacher training, we had a mat program and we had an equipment program. So all of the equipment, reformer, Cadillac, chairs, barrels, everything, all together in one program. The company that I work for now has a mat program, a reformer program, and an apparatus program. And again, every educator is a little bit different. If you're interested in coming to the Balanced Body program, I suggest that if you want to be a full Pilates teacher, you go through at least the mat training and the reformer training. You test out at that moment, after you've completed all your hours, and then think about integrating the other pieces of apparatus later. In Los Angeles, the primary what am I trying to say? Most of the work in Los Angeles is mat and reformer based. And we do use the other pieces of equipment as well, but it's much more important for me to hire an instructor who really knows mat and really knows reformer at the onset of coming in. Take a look at also the business that you're going to. There's an organization called the PMA, Pilates Method Alliance. And they are sort of a nonprofit umbrella organization that keeps the Pilates schools somewhat in check. And what do I mean by that? Well, you can call them and you can ask about balanced body, you can ask about BASI, you can ask how many hours are required and see if they are considered a PMA educator. Now, not everybody has gone through this process, and you still might find an educator out there who's great that isn't associated with PMA. So then how would you tell that? Well, take a look at how many hours are required. Becoming a Pilates instructor is generally somewhat of a long journey. It doesn't mean that you can't start teaching a little sooner than later or do it in steps, but it's definitely not a 2-weekend kind of thing. I also want you to take a session, if you can, with whoever is going to be teaching the course. Now that is really, really important, okay? Because you could be getting a credential from a major brand that has beautiful materials like this, but at the end of the day, if you don't have a personal connection to the person who is teaching that course, that's going to stop you from really being able to take in. You also want to ask some questions about who is teaching the course and what their credentials are, okay? And don't be shy about it. When someone asks me about myself, I'm like, hey, you're doing your homework. You know, bravo for you, because honestly, oftentimes what I get is, how fast can I get my credential and how much is it gonna cost? No questions really about anything else, no questions about me. So ask your teacher how long they have been teaching. And this is a true story. I have had students come into teacher training who have said to me, yeah, well, my goal is to open a teacher training facility. And I'm like, that seems very odd, since you have no experience actually teaching, that one of your first goals is to create a teacher training program. So it happens. Like there's a lot of crazy things out there in the Pilates world, but there are so many passionate, creative, loyal, smart, beautiful Pilates instructors out there, and I really want you to get your education from somebody who has the heart and the soul of a Pilates instructor. We are all doing this because we love it. We're doing it because we want to make our clients healthy, stronger, and keep growing and stay healthy. So ask your teacher some questions about who they are and how long they've been teaching. And if it's convenient for you, I really encourage you to spend the money, whatever the investment is, and go and take a private session from that teacher. Because if I'm a crappy teacher, or if I'm not even your cup of tea, like I might still be a great teacher, but I just may not be your cup of tea, right? Then, you know, you're not going to take it in. It's not going to be worth it. If you're thinking of doing any of this coursework virtually, because that's like a new thing, right? And even with me, you can do some coursework virtually. See if you can get a sense of what that looks like and how you're going to be integrated into that class. Because for me, when people join me virtually, I really want them to feel like they're in the room, not like they're just watching a webinar and no one is seeing them. They don't have the chance to talk or ask questions. So if you're thinking of doing any of this virtually, ask them what that looks like, ask them how that handle that, but of course, it is always, always better to be in person. So, takeaways. I suggest big brand over small, little boutique because of the recognition all over the world, especially because the price point is usually the same. Decide what style of Pilates you're interested in, look for somebody who's teaching that style. Decide what level that you want to test out at and make sure that they have that available. Take a look at the materials. Take a look at the studio. If you can, meet the teacher. And that is a very good place to start. Really do your homework here. If you have any questions, you can comment below. You can email me. You can take a look at my Instagram. I wish you success on your Pilates journey.